Thank you for joining the Peaceful Hugs podcast. I'm Mark Z, and I'm with my compatriot Lorelei. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. We have, it must be God's doing because of what's going on in the world. We didn't expect to have this very special guest, Pastor Tat, with us today, and now with what's happening in Iran and all of the political uprising there. It's interesting that now you visit us, and there's a lot to talk about.
It sure is.
I think first and foremost, though, is your story's pretty amazing. I think most people will believe being that you were there and lived in Iran and were asked to leave. We're the last to leave, right?
I was asked to leave. I was deported, you could say.
Yeah.
Well, Mark and Lorelei, it's really great to be here with you. And I think the topic is providential in the sense that to talk about this and help our listeners understand better, perhaps from not only a Christian point of view, but from an experiential point of view, what's going on in Iran.
For sure. Well, let's start with, how do you even end up in Iran? I mean, I know the story, but with your parents, but what it was like living there, growing up there, and then having to say goodbye must have been hard, and not being able to go back.
Yes. Well, the story begins with my mother and father after World War II. My father had been a captain in the military. He'd been in Germany after World War II. He was a medical doctor. And he and my mother both had this calling upon their lives they wanted to go to the Muslim world. They wanted to go there and be witnesses. I think a lot of that generation had seen the world, and they kind of got moved by the needs, and they wanted to be a part of it. So they went to Iran in 1947. I was 1.5 years old when they took me there in their arms. It took them about a month to get there. Right now,
Wow.
They had to take a boat, a former troop carrier boat that it was now using for commercial use, all the way to Lebanon. Then they had to go and get a visa from the Iranian embassy there, and then they took a bus across the desert called the Naran. I think it was called the Naran bus. I still remember it as a boy going to Damascus. Then they rented a car with an Arab driver who drove them. And then you're thinking, here's a couple with a baby with an Arab driver, trusting him to take him all the way to Iran. Took him all the way to Iran. Finally got to Tabriz, which is the provincial capital of Azerbaijan, in December of 1947, and they had a hard time finding the mission hospital because the driver had no idea where they were going, and they didn't. They found a guy in the bazaar who knew Arabic. He kind of pointed out where the hospital was, and finally, after a month of travel, they arrived at the door of the American hospital that had been established for probably 80 or 90 years before that, and that's where my mom and dad, with me, began their career in Iran.
Wow.
That's how we got there.
That's how you got there. And then, you grow up there, and what's it like growing up and growing up and being a Christian at that time? Because now it would be very, very different.
Well, first of all, there was no school that we could go to except Iranian school. And at that time, the local school was in the Azeri language, the Azerbaijan language, because Tabriz is the provincial capital of the Azerbaijan province, where people speak Azeri Turkish at home, and Farsi is the national language. So I soon began. All my playmates were, except for my brothers and sisters that later came along, were from Tabriz. So I learned the Turkish language, and I still speak that language. And my mom homeschooled me, and so that was a challenge to my mom, because she was not a trained teacher or anything, but she began to teach us, and she didn't realize I had a learning disability. So learning disabilities were not sort of vogue in those days.
Oh, yeah.
And so she thought either I was very dumb or very rebellious because I was having a hard time. But we did go to church. You speak about that. Of course, my mother read the Bible to us, and we had devotions in our home. And so I knew where my mother and father stood. But we went to a local evangelical. It's called the Evangelical Church of Iran. It was founded by Presbyterians in that particular denomination. In 1860, it became a registered church in Iran. So they had a church building, and they had an English service for expatriates and others, and a Turkish service. So I went to 2 church services every Sunday morning. And that wasn't always so easy when you're 6, 7 years old, but we went, and so I heard hundreds of sermons in Turkish and English as a boy growing up. We visited homes, Iranian homes, especially around New Year's, Nowruz, which is their New Year. Since my father was the director of the hospital, all the employees wanted us to visit their homes. So for 2 weeks, every afternoon, 2 to 3 homes we would visit, and they would have sweets and nuts. It was a kid's heaven, all the stuff to eat. And so I learned a lot about the culture. I learned a lot about Islam because we watched the month of fasting, and we saw a bunch of Muharram where they reenact the martyrdoms of some of their martyrs right at the early beginning of the Shia movement. And we also were aware of the persecution that some of the Muslim converts were having. Most of the people that came to that church were converts from Orthodox Armenian background or Zoroastrian background or Jewish background, and only maybe a handful were actually Muslims who became Christ. It was very rare, actually, to see a Muslim become a Christian. And usually they had a rough time because the Christians always questioned their sincerity, thinking they were trying to get close to the American missionaries or whatever, and the Muslims rejected them. And so it was not an easy thing for those people. So I saw that, and I remember my mom and dad talking to me about how the difficulty that those Muslim converts were having.
Wow. And then you end up being the pastor.
Well, not quite yet.
You work towards being the pastor.
I had no interest in being a pastor.
Oh, you really?
No. My goal was to.
I figured all that time in church as a 7-year-old.
It was like maybe I could find a way to get out of here.
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm good. Now I did give my heart to Christ as a young person, but what I wanted to be the American ambassador to Iran, because our hospital was next to the American consulate. And I would see all these American diplomats come, and they didn't know the language, and they'd only stay there a year or two, and they'd be moved on to somewhere else. And I said, these people don't understand how to relate to these people. And I thought to myself, I could do it. I can speak their language. I could represent. But of course, God changed my direction. At the age of 19, I had my 3rd collapsed lung, and I was in the hospital. My parents were in Iran, and I was totally angry at God and totally given up on everything when my pastor came to visit me and prayed with me, and he asked me how I was doing spiritually. I said, I'm cool with God, but I was really angry at God. And when he left the room, the Holy Spirit came into that room in a way that I felt like I was nailed to my bed. And I said to God, if you can have this beat up, worn out, I'd been in the hospital a month, you can have me. You can have me for what I am. And I surrendered my life to Christ. And and then a year later, I was in college and going to church. And during the preaching of a sermon, I had to make a decision what to major in the next day, and I was kind of wrestling with that. And I heard God speak to me. I'm calling you to be a minister of the gospel. I heard it just as clear as day. And so I've never doubted that. And from that point on, my life became how to get to seminary and how to go into the ministry.
Wow. I was going to skip over probably the most important part of the whole podcast is that story. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And when it happens to you, we talked about this with our last guest too, and it's happened to me a couple times. When God's talking to you, it feels like you're nailed to your bed, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I describe it as someone put like a 100-pound sack of wheat on my chest, and I felt like it was like give up, Tat, because I'd been fighting him all the time. See, I loved basketball. Basketball was my life, and I had 3 collapsed lungs in college, in high school and college, and every time it ruined a season of basketball. So I was getting angrier and angrier at God for the very thing that I loved, and the very thing I could really shine in, because I wasn't a good student, was taken away. But God, I'm glad that happened when I was 19 and not at 60.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, some people don't have that moment until they've really burned a lot of bridges and made a lot of messes over their life. And so God was gracious to me. And from then on, I have had no doubt, and I've had nothing but God's blessing in ministry all these years. It's about 55 or 56 years now since I was ordained as a pastor.
Wow. That's amazing.
Were you feeling that way when you knew the time was coming where they were going to ask you to leave? It had to feel, I mean, having lived there that long.
Well, let me say that I left Iran as a senior in high school with my parents. And so I came back to the States, went to college, went to seminary, and then was called to a little church in New Jersey, in Carteret, New Jersey, just across from Staten Island, a church of about 200. And I pastored that church. It was very rough for me. It was not a church that was very responsive to the gospel. I was very discouraged. And several times in my heart, I thought, I should see if there's a way for me to get back to Iran, because I knew that my wife was born in Iran, so she knows Farsi, I know Farsi, and here we are pastoring this little church. And so when I came out of seminary, I wrote the pastor of the church I would eventually pastor in Tehran and say, I'm graduating from seminary. Could I be like a youth minister or an associate pastor? And he wrote back and said, we just don't have the budget for that. So I said, phew, I don't have to go to Iran. After 6 years of this little church, I'm away at a conference, and my wife gets a letter from the Evangelical Church of Iran inviting me and us to go to Abadan, which is down on the oil fields, and pastor a bilingual congregation. Wow. A congregation that had an English service and a Persian service. They thought I would be set for that. And they knew that I had been ordained, and they knew my background. They knew me, they knew my family and I'd always said, I'm not going anywhere unless my wife feels the same call. Because I've seen too many marriages where the husband is like gun-ho, his wife dragging along, and she's miserable and hates it and has emotional problems and everything. So my wife was the one who read the letter, and I was off at camp. And she calls me. That was before cell phones. She calls me on a public phone at the camp, and she says, "Are you sitting down?" And I'm thinking, "Oh, she wrecked the car. Somebody broke into our house. What happened?" And then she says, "I'm ready to go." I said, where are you going? She said, "Well, we got a letter." And she told the whole thing. And I literally almost sat down because I couldn't believe that she said, "God is telling me to go too." Now, that was in 1978, where the previous revolution was just beginning to kick up. And so I resigned that church with the idea that we were going to go to Iran. And then I found out I couldn't get a visa. Everything in Iran was in flux because the revolution was going. So for 6 months, we just hang out in a little town called Ventnor, New Jersey, in a little apartment. It was a hard time because, I'm used to going to work, and here we were with 2 kids in a 2-bedroom little tiny apartment, and not sure. I'd resigned, not sure if we could go forward. But finally, one of my friends went and talked to one of the Ayatollahs, because in the Shia Islam, there are these Ayatollahs that have sort of realms of authority and decision-making. And one of his name was Talaqani. He was known as kind of a liberal, more soft-spoken Ayatollah. And we asked him, I said, in the new regime, in the new government, will Westerners be able to have a pastor in a church? And he said, of course. So he issued a telex to the Iranian embassy that was still functioning in Washington, D.C. And I go and I get with my wife and we take our passports. We get 4-year multiple entry work permit visas from the Islamic Republic of Iran. I have them. I'm keeping it, as a something that I don't think anyone else has. Maybe I can sell it on eBay someday. I don't know. So there we were, and so we got permission, and we went off to Iran. Now, when we got to Iran, it was 5 months after the Shah had gone, and Ayatollah Khomeini had flown in on the Air France jumbo jet, and the crowds had gone crazy about him. But there was no real government yet. So, you just kind of didn't go out at night because there was still shooting in the streets and there's still stuff like that. So we saw the time where each of the neighborhoods had their own kind of vigilante groups to kind of, protect their own neighborhoods. So if you wanted to drive anywhere at night, every time you went from one neighborhood to another neighborhood, there'd be a roadblock that'd stop you, they'd check your trunk and so on. So we didn't go anywhere. And so we began to work with the community church of Tehran, which had been started about 25 years before that by American missionaries. They started it for English-speaking businessmen, diplomats, that there'd be a church. And it had 600 members before the revolution, but all of them had gone. When I got there were 6 members left.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
And no program. So we met at the German church, which was in the northern part of the city, and the Germans didn't like to worship on Friday, and so they said we can use the church on Friday. Friday was the only day off. So if you're going to get people who are not working, you got to. So we worshipped on Friday mornings, and so I put an ad in the only English language newspaper, and I put a simple ad with a little cross in it and said Protestant worship service, Friday mornings at 10 o'clock. I didn't put the address, and I put a phone number. So you had to call me, and I had to vet who I was inviting to come to church. I didn't want a whole bunch of anti-American people to show up. There was a great anti-American spirit at that point. At that point, I get into a taxi, and they find out I was American. Of course, I would talk to them in Farsi, and so that kind of quelled the waters a little bit. And our local little grocery store were all from Azerbaijan, so they all spoke Azeri Turkish. So when I talked Azeri Turkish with them, they saved products for us because there were shortages. If we were running low on eggs or something, they'd save it for us, So it's kind of cool. And that's how we put ads in, and before you know it, 50, 60 people were attending from different parts of the world: Nigeria, Japan, Finland, Australia are the people that come to mind right away that were coming to that church from all different backgrounds: Baptist, Anglican, Episcopalian, Presbyterian, everybody coming together. There was the only English language church, the only option, and so we had, and there was a lot of comrade fellowship, because when you're a minority, you don't just go to church to worship. You go to church to have some fellowship with your own people, and to find out what's going on. We had no trust in the local news. We had to listen to BBC or Voice of America to find out sort of what's going on. And so we would get reports from each other. Well, how's it in your neighborhood? What's going on there? And so we did that till Thanksgiving came, and then CBS called me up and said, "Do you have a worship service on Thanksgiving?" And the CBS was still in the country, and NBC was still in the country. I said, "We do." And they said, "We'd like to come and film it." And the first thing I thought is, some big truck pulling up and all the hordes of people coming. I said, let me think about that. Let me think about that. So I called the advisory team, and they said, "Well, what do you feel?" I said, "Well, I think it'd be a good idea." But they said they would come in cabs. They would not come and make a big thing. They would just bring a cameraman. And so on the Thanksgiving of 1979, they filmed our service. Now, the hostages had been already taken. The hostages were taken on November 4.
Okay.
And it was a Sunday, and we were at the Persian church. We heard about it. On my way home, I said, "Let's drive by the American Embassy." We tried to see what was going on, but it was all blocked off, so we couldn't get close to it. And we kind of went home and said, "This is kind of a dilemma. Our embassy's gone. Who do we have to help us except God?" And so it was during this time that when they wanted to do the Thanksgiving service, that we said okay. Now, after the hostage crisis, they cut off all international phone calls like they've done now. So, when my parents and family are watching the news that the American embassy has been taken hostage, they say, "Well, let's call Tat." Whoops, you can't get through to him. How's he doing? So when they woke up on Thanksgiving morning and saw the news, there I was preaching. And they did an interview with me and my family, and they asked my 6-year-old son, did he have a message? And he very, very cautiously said, say hi to Grandma and Grandpa. But he kind of fuzzed that, so they weren't sure if it was Grandma or Grandpa, so they wouldn't cause any arguments. And that was some people, we got letters from all over the world saying that was one of the best Thanksgivings we had. We saw you on Thanksgiving Day.
Wow.
So it's after that we get put out of the country.
Well, you have a different, I don't believe everything you read on the internet, right? So if you read, and I love history, so what I have always believed, because I've never been able to ask anybody, was the Iranian people wanted the Shah gone because of some things he was doing that we all know about, or think we know about anyway, but that they had no idea that it was going to go from the Shah to something worse in an autocracy, and so driven by the Muslim rule of law So they went from one extreme to another. They thought they were getting a democracy of some sort.
Yeah, well, I would hear when I was a teenager from like college students, they would say, if Iran ever became fully Islamic, it would become heaven on earth. In other words, it would be like the millennium. I mean, it would just be tremendous. Well, for some, and then when it came to the Shah, a lot of different groups gathered together. They united against him. The communist movement, the Mujahideen, are really a Marxist group that they joined in. Then there was, I would suppose, the Muslim group, because he had, maybe a lot of our people don't know that, but when Khomeini had led demonstrations in the 60s when I was in high school, and so the Shah exiled him. Now the Shah could have put him to death, but he decided that since he was a big religious leader, he exiled him to Iraq. And then Iraq, Saddam Hussein exiles him, and he ends up in Paris. So isn't it interesting that this guy, his main enemy is the Shah, and his main enemy is Saddam Hussein? It seemed like the whole thing was a personal vendetta in a way. You're right. People thought that it would be cool, but they didn't. So they had a referendum early on, and there was only one vote, yes. There was no place for no. And so everybody was afraid not to, because they marked your ID card whether you'd voted or not. And so, everybody knew that if someone, a lot of people voted for the Islamic revolution, or for the regime, and as someone said, it was neither republic, it was neither Islamic, and it was none of those lists, those things that is listed. So they didn't really know, and it became they forced a population that had gotten pretty used to, at least in the big cities, to Western dress and women's rights and I remember as a teenager just sneaking off. There were some bars and cabarets and all those kind of things going on, and all I had to shut down. And so they said that at the Hilton Hotel they poured so much whiskey down the drain that the rats and mice were drunk for days on end, because that's all they could drink. I mean, it was like we're just going to force everybody into a certain pattern of life, and not every people. And if you don't, you got in trouble. You could lose your job. So everybody's got their survival mode on, and so that's what they did. So it was. I don't think they had any idea. And then as time went on, the world changed, and with coming of the internet and all the communication things, and I think 8 million Iranians have left the country. Wow. And that's some of the best minds and some of the most educated people. Yep. And they're all over the world. There's probably hardly a country in the world where you won't find Iranians. And there's a prophecy in Jeremiah 49 about Elam. And Elam is one of the ancient names of the Persians. And it says that a day will come when the king of Elam will be humiliated, and the people of Iran will be scattered to the four corners of the earth. And then God will reestablish his throne in the midst of them, and there will be a regathering. That's a prophecy in Jeremiah 49. Wow. And now what that meant at the time, I believe prophecy, the prophet saw that as something that was pertinent to his current situation. But often prophecies have sort of a second projection that the person that's giving it doesn't even know. And so that's a lot of the people, the Christians in Iran believe that the people of Iran, the rulers of Iran, were such proud people that God had to humiliate the king, had to break the king. And if you listen to Reza Pahlavi now, the son, he's a humble guy. He's not saying, I got to go back and become king. Right. He said, no, I'll do whatever the people want. We're going to do this. We're going to have a referendum. We're going to bring all the groups together. We're going to work on democracy. And the people in the street now are saying, down with Khomeini, which is Islam, and down, they say, Chapi, which means the leftists, and down with communism. So this is their statement. We don't want communism. We don't want socialism. We don't want Islam. We want a democracy. We want an open society, a secular society that everybody can follow their own conscience and who they're going to worship and how they're going to worship. If that happens, our world is going to be different. Our whole world is going to be different, because that country has caused pain and suffering, and and military action across the years. Yeah.
And I can't wait to get to because I want to hear your opinion on everything that's going on, because it's more valid than probably what I'm reading in the, in the newspaper for sure. But I don't want to leave out. I mean, how did they ask you to leave? And then what I mean,
that's an important story.
Yeah.
That's an important story. So after we'd been there a year, in Iran, you would take your passports to the police station, and they would give you another residence permit. They renew your residence permit for another year. So we didn't even go. We had a guy who worked in our office, and he took our passports down, and he said, they won't do that. They've given you an appointment to appear in front of the censorship bureau, Islamic censorship bureau, on such and such a day at 8 a.m. And so I didn't know what was going on. So I took my passports. I had a friend who was a Jewish convert, who was not a Muslim convert, and he was a lawyer. He said he'd go with me. So we went to this office at 8 o'clock a.m., and the guy that we were supposed to see didn't show up to 12. So we sat there for 4 hours drinking tea, wondering what was going to happen. So finally, I'm ushered in, and he says, let me see your passports. He was just very, not very sort of impolite in a way. And I gave them to him. He said, yeah, it's come from above that you need to leave the country. And I said, why? He said, well, it's not safe for you to be here anymore. And I do think there was a little bit of legitimate concern about other Americans being taken hostage. I'll give him that. So I said, can I just tell you why I've been here? I said, I'm not here from the American government. I said, I represent the Christians of America. And I came here just to share God's love with your people and to serve them. But my God tells me that I need to obey the authority of this country. So we will go and leave as you have said, without any, we're not going to cause any problems, because we will obey. Out of respect to our God and to his word, we're going to do what you say. So he gave me 10 days to leave the country.
10 days.
10 days. So here, I have a church. I have kids in school. Well, it was summer. I guess the kids were out in school at that time. So I walk out, and I'm a little bit dazed, because I wasn't expecting this. I thought, what am I going to do? First of all, every plane seat is booked for 6 months, because every Iranian that's trying to leave is leaving. How am I going to go get tickets in 10 days? Well, go see the Swiss embassy. So I grabbed a cab, went to the Swiss embassy, because I knew they were neutral, and I knew so often they helped Americans in this situation. So I went in and said, can I see the ambassador or somebody? And they said, sure. And nothing much was going on at the Swiss embassy, so I'm ushered right into the ambassador's office. And I'm holding my passport. I said, I'm an American citizen. As you know, sir, my embassy is gone, and I have orders from the Iranian government that I need to leave in 10 days, and I don't know how to do this I don't know how this is going to happen. He said, sit down, my friend. He said, what day do you want to leave? I said, well, I think I should leave the 7th day. I don't think I should leave this to the end. 7th day seemed more spiritual, too. So he picks up the phone, calls Swissair, and says, you will put the Stewart family, 2 adults and 2 children, on your flight to Zurich on that day. I got exactly 7 days ahead of that, 1 week later. Put someone down. I said, really? So I went to the Swiss. In those days, you had to go to the Swiss Airlines office and buy your ticket. I got the cash. I paid for my tickets, and now I had my tickets. Okay, now I had a church. And so we told the church that we could not continue, and so we had one last service, had communion together, and then we had to get rid of a lot of stuff. Now, when the American church everybody had left, all their Christian books they brought to the church, there was about as high as this room, a pile of Christian books in the old church that I had brought to my new home where I had a big office, and I categorized all these commentaries and devotional books and great books. And so I didn't know what to do with all this. So I said, okay, we'll let all of our friends know they can come and take anything from our house they want. So people were showing up all day and night. We'll take the vacuum cleaner, we'll take the TV, and so most anything went. Well, the morning came, and our flight was at 8 a.m., and they said you have to be at the airport at 4 a.m. And so it was dark. We had 8 suitcases, 2 kids, 1 wife, all into 2 vehicles, and at 4 a.m. at 3:30 in the morning, we're finding our way to the airport. We get to the airport, into the parking lot, and as soon as we get there, a whole crowd of young people gather around us. And I look at my wife and I say, oh, my goodness, maybe we're not going to make it. And then I realized it was all the young people from the Iranian church. They had spent the night there praying and fasting because there's a whole other stream which I haven't told you about, my ministry to the Iranian young people while I was there, which was the main reason I was there. The English church was just sort of the cover. And so we walk into the airport, sort of like a mafia guy, with all these young people carrying my suitcases, carrying our babies, and carrying our children. It was quite encouraging to be let in. The airport was absolutely chaotic because all these Iranians were trying to leave, and the government had said you could only take $1,000 cash out of the country.
Oh, my gosh.
And so women were having like jewelry hidden on their person, and they were searching them, and they were like yanking things off these women, and they were screaming and cursing. I mean, it was wall to wall people, and so we finally bound our way to get through the different levels of security, and it wasn't anything like today. But and then our bags checked in, and it was just really difficult. When we got to the place where I had to say goodbye to these young people, the last conversation I had on the soil of Iran was a young Muslim guy that had been coming to our fellowship. And he said, I want you to know that through your ministry here, I've given my heart to Christ. Mm. And I prayed with him and said, God bless you. We'll try to stay in touch. That was my last conversation on Iranian soil. Mm. And so we get to before we get to the gate, the Iranian security people take us into a back room. And they get on a computer and they're trying to find maybe some violation, something to charge us, something to get money from us. The funny thing is they were all speaking Turkish together, so I know exactly what they were saying. So I said to my wife, it's okay, They couldn't find anything. I mean, we didn't have a ticket. We didn't have we paid our taxes. I mean, there was nothing they could find. They were very frustrated with that. And I just spoke English, played the Dun American, and just sort of so I could figure out what they were saying. And so that was the last bridge, and then we got right to the gate. And then it comes over the loudspeaker. Will the Stewart family please come to the podium? So again, we're going, every time we hear these blocks, we're going like, are we going to make it? And they said, I hope it's okay, but we've had to put you in first class.
We hope it's okay.
Oh, yeah. We can handle that.
Yeah.
So God let us fly out of Iran, first class on Swiss Air to Zurich, and then on to New York City. When we got off the plane in New York City, my son pulled my pants. He was 6 years old. He said, Dad, look, there's an American flag that's not burning. He hadn't seen an American flag yet that wasn't burning. Mm. And so that was our reentry back to America. That was in the summer of 1980. And haven't been back to Iran since.
Well, it had to be, it got emotional for me when you were talking, because we didn't talk about that part. I didn't know you were working with young people in Iran.
Yes.
And for them to do that, put themselves at risk,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and had to be incredible. Probably, were you in tears? Were you? I mean, the emotions of leaving, and maybe it seems more now because of what we know. But for a Muslim to convert,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and at that time, the risk. Of doing that.
I think I was kind of numb at that time in a way. I mean, having slept all night, got to the airport, all the emotion, wondering if we were, even at the last minute, we're not going to be allowed to leave, all that kind of stuff. When I reflected, I actually met that guy many years later in California. He finally and his family, for different reasons, left Iran. And then he had 3 or 4 brothers, and so I actually had, and they all were Christians now too. Wow. And so it was, God let me see where that happened. But yeah, the main reason I'd gone to Iran was my invitation was from the Iranian Presbyterian Church, or what they call the Evangelical Church of Iran, and they wanted me to work with the young people. And so as soon as I got there, I began to lead Bible studies with the Iranians. And that we had 4 churches in Tehran. And this is kind of interesting. 2 of them worshipped in Farsi, 1 of them worshipped in Armenian, and 1 of them worshipped in Assyrian. Mm. The 2 minority Christian groups in Iran are Armenian and Assyrian. And normally they're Church of the East, they're Nestorian churches. But through the years of Presbyterian mission work, a Protestant movement grew out of those language groups. And so if you go to California now to to Turlock or to San Jose, you'll find a large Assyrian community, and many of them are Protestant, and I'm in touch with many of them. And so the thing that I think is most important for this point is I had 97 young people for a conference a month before I left Iran. And during that conference, without going into great detail, they were young people on the brink of not knowing what their future was. Mm-hmm. And I taught to them from Romans. We went through the book of Mark, and they were so profoundly touched by the scriptures and that point in their life that the last night when I had a fire and asked them to commit themselves, every one of them knelt there and committed themselves not only to be Christians, but to serve Christ with all their heart. And so what happened is when I got to America, down the road, those 97, some stayed in Iran, many got scattered, some are in Australia, they're all over the world. And that gave me a platform to continue my relationship with them. And so in 2000, I started a magazine called Pastoral Magazine. It's called Shaban, which means pastor. And I would send it free of charge, mail it to anybody that said they were in ministry. And so those people that once had been my students, they were now older in ministry situations. And that magazine grew to several hundred people, and that gave me connection to Iranians in the great diaspora. Mm-hmm. And then they started inviting me. And so if you read my book, I tell you that I was putting on 100, how many thousand miles on United every year, 2 to 3 trips a month to all over the world.
Wow.
I mean, a lot in the States too, Canada, and I did a lot in Canada, and then in Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Germany, England, all those places, Turkey. I was going to follow up because the diaspora, the Christians were fleeing the country or becoming Christians in the process of fleeing. So it's amazing what God did. It's a fulfillment of the prophecy that I read in Jeremiah.
Wow. And did out of the magazine, then is that where the satellite?
Well, no, the satellite, Sat-7, which is a very well-known Middle Eastern ministry. It started with the Arabic language, which you probably know about. Terry Oscott, who is the founder of that, is a good friend. And so, somewhere in there, the idea thought, well, we need a Farsi channel. Mm-hmm. So first we played, we had 1 hour or 2 hours a day on the Arabic channel. But, you can't really build a great following in just 2 hours a day in Farsi. So what happened was that Terry and others began to put together a crew to start this channel, and they asked me to be a part of that. So from the very foundation, I was on that, and after a couple of years, they asked me to be the chairman of the board. I was chairman of the board for 10 years, and I did a lot of teaching on satellite. We did. We modeled how to have a small group. We modeled how to work together with the scriptures. And so a lot of people that became Christian 10, 20 years ago knew me from being on the Christian channel. Okay. And so the Christian channel, what's good about Sat-7 is, and rather than just selling time to all kinds of Christian ministries, we control all the programming. Mm-hmm. So we have our ethos and our standards of what's going to be on the program, and it's unified. We try to be non-denominational in the sense of the things that are different about Christians, we minimize those. But the core truth of the gospel, who Christ is, what it means to serve Christ, those are the things that, and now it's really grown to Christian counseling. Mm-hmm. And if you go look at Sat-7, and it's just amazing what's happened. But I remember when we had really basic programs.
Now it's much bigger.
One of the early programs, a guy was, Billy Graham's book on how to become a Christian. I forget what the name of the book is, but he had in Farsi. His whole program was just reading the book for half an hour. You just looked at people were listening. That's the thing. You worry about who's going to watch. And now, right now, with the Iranians, if you have the content, they don't care if it's poor quality or not catchy or flashing lights or whatever we have to do to keep Westerners interested.
It's hard.
Sorry, I'm talking an awful lot.
No, I find it. I feel bad because I haven't let her ask any questions.
No,
let's give her a chance.
No, it's been great.
Yeah, no, so then you come here, you plant churches, you have the magazine going out, you're on Sat-7. I mean, you're witnessing and preaching to Iranians all over the world, essentially.
Yes.
And-
I really feel that you need to go local before you go global. And so that's why I actually, before I even had the broader ministry, my wife and I was called to a Presbyterian church in the suburbs of D.C., Church of the Atonement in Silver Spring, Maryland. And so I got involved in just doing ministry. Then before I knew it, Iranians were popping up because a lot of Iranians like D.C., and there were a lot of Iranians there. And so I found one Christian and two Christian. And my wife said, well, we ought to start a Bible study. Mm-hmm. So we had it. First, it was a monthly Bible study. We had potluck in our home. And, 5, 6, 7 Iranians would show up. We'd sing a few hymns. And my Farsi was still pretty, nothing like it is today because I've been working on it for all these years. And that grew to a point where we couldn't do it in our home anymore. And since I was a senior pastor, they couldn't stop me from saying we're going to meet on Sunday afternoon. So on Sunday afternoons, at 4 o'clock, I did an open Bible study, sort of come and ask questions Bible study, come and challenge things. And we sat around the table, and anybody could show up and ask questions, and I just gave up scripture. It just was that kind of a thing. Because people came with tons of questions. Mm-hmm. Then we had a worship service at 5 to 6, and then we had a fellowship time of you have to have tea and sweets when you get together with Middle Eastern people, as you know. And so that grew and grew and grew, and then God helped me find a young man who I discipled, who I took with me on all my visitation, whenever he could. We started Bible studies in Baltimore and West Virginia. We started Bible studies in each of the neighborhoods around D.C. and Farsi. And he went with me. Every night I was in a different home with a bunch of people coming together. And so the brother there we ordained him finally, and he's the pastor. Mm. And so I have nothing to do with that church pretty much, except that I talk to the pastor once in a while. And then we moved out here, partly because my wife Patty was from Colorado, and so she'd been a tremendous help in the ministry. And she's a musician, so she had to teach them hymns, because they didn't know how to sing together. They have only solo singers in that part of the world. Everything's solo, And so we moved to Colorado because her family was here. And we found that we had helped to start a church in her parents' home that grew into a church that is still here in Colorado, meeting at Faith Presbyterian Church in Aurora. So every Sunday morning we have a Persian worship service. And every Thursday night I do a Zoom Bible study with Iranians. And there's some from Canada, some from Los Angeles, some from a bunch from here. And we do just inductive Bible study where I'm getting them to look at the scriptures and respond. And I love it. I just love it.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Do you have questions? Because I keep
I mean, yeah. We're coming up on time, but I think the question that keeps coming to mind, I know, I'm fine with that. I feel like the question that keeps coming to mind, knowing timing-wise what's going on now, is like having lived in the Middle East for a season, but then coming back and knowing that we care about the global church. Oftentimes we're trying to pray for what's happening to Christian persecution and just churches across different countries. And so what would you say is like the number one thing we should be praying for Iranian Christians that are still in Iran, or what are we praying for to see happen in Iran?
Yeah, we believe there could be as many as 1 million Iranian Christians. Now, let me put that in context. When I was in Iran, we would have said there were 3,000 Iranian Protestant Christians. Mm. So in 47 years, from 3,000 to 1 million is pretty good growth. And so there are a lot of secret Christians. Sometimes they contact me, but they've been a Christian, but they've never met another Christian in their country out of fear. So I think to pray for the spiritual strength of these secret Christians to slowly perhaps identify with others as if Iran changes, and protection. Mm-hmm. We have lots of Iranian Christians in jail because, you see, it's in a theocracy. If you convert, then that is an offense against the state,
yes, against
the government. So it's treason. I mean, if you convert, it's really treason. So they use the treason laws against the Christian rather because that's easier to sort of support in the world of illegal stuff. So they get 5 years, 10 years, sometimes in jail. And being in prison in Iran is no fun. Sometimes if you're diabetic, you don't get your medicine. Sometimes you don't get enough healthy food. If you have money, you can probably buy. It's the kind of thing. If you have money, you might be able to buy the use of a phone, or you might be able to buy different things. If you don't have money, it's really hard, and very hard on women. Yeah. Many women are abused in prison, and so it's very hard. So I would pray for safety, for spiritual discernment, and that. It's going to be very interesting if this regime goes aside, how these Christians are going to be able to reprogram themselves not to be afraid and think that's, and to come out of the woodwork. And now there are many networks, like I have a network and other Iranian pastors have networks of hundreds of churches sometimes, some 10, 15 house churches. And so those networks will be able to come up and maybe start to meet in public places. And we have church buildings. Our church we have 4 church buildings in Tehran, and they're still being used by just a trickle of people. But we can begin to use those buildings again and draw people. So I think that's the best thing to pray for. I gave a little long on that.
No, that's perfect, and amen. We will be praying for that. Absolutely, yeah.
What do you think? Politically, we're in an awkward position, right? So I as I read through this, not that anybody condones dropping bombs or military action, but when you look at the whole thing and you say, okay, if you go do that as the United States and you do some type of military action, it could have a negative impact then and be worse and not get the outcome that we want, which is a democracy and Christianity back there. If you do nothing, you hope there's enough underground networks to finally force change there. But boy, that's a risky proposition in itself too. And you have 700 people as of this morning that have been killed.
Yeah, it's probably more than that actually. They're equating it to Pharaoh let my people go. They're equating it that as God hardened Pharaoh's heart. They feel that God has hardened this man's heart because if he had any kind of heart, that he would just let the people have their way and not be people die over this. But Islam is a religion of shedding blood, of killing people for in the name of God, and so he feels totally justified that he's doing God's work by having these people killed, and so that's a sad thing. So I think that. When I've talked to Iranians, they said that most Iranians who are not in the government's employment will be happy for that military action because it could be the death blow for this regime.
Sure.
So that don't worry about the Iranians. They're going to be more upset if we do nothing.
Okay.
Because first of all, Trump has said he's going to do something.
Yes.
And they have gone out and they've lost loved ones because they believe that somebody was going to come and help them. So I would urge our government officials and our president to do something tangible that will show our support and that will bring more pressure on this regime.
I was when we dropped the bombs to destroy the nuclear facilities there. I have to tell you again, not looking for a response necessarily. The biggest mistake was not doing it then. You're already in there and just and take them out then. And now we have a step 2, I feel like, where he has to do something. Our president has to do something.
Well, let's give some historical perspective. In 1953, our CIA engineered a revolution in Iran by bringing the Shah back. And that's stuck in the craw of a lot of people that America did this. And I think what I hear, what the Prince Reza Pahlavi has said, he said, we need to do this. We need to do this. We don't want to say that in the end America did it. We need America's help. So I think the reason that that perhaps the American government has held back a little bit is saying, if this is something that the people really are going to do, then because the other uprisings, we should have supported them too, in my opinion. But I think that's part of the thinking. Now that it's really serious, the people can't go backwards. They got to go forward one way or another. And now is the time to help. I was you too. I was hoping, oh boy, we'll get this thing all done.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
But then I thought, then it would appear and on the enemies of Iran would always say, or the people that didn't like the change, see, America made this. America's the enemy.
Right.
They came in and they did this. But now, if the people have paid a sacrifice, the people have done it. They've said, this is what we want. And so now helping them makes sense. And the credit will be that they really were on their way to getting it. They probably would get it without our help. There'd just be more people killed.
Yeah.
Oh, so you think they'll be able to do it one way or another?
I believe they will. They have nothing to go back to. They said, we die there or we go home and die because we have no money, no job, no money, no water. We have nothing to go back to. And living in this country, so we might as well die. We might as well die fighting for it. So,
That's just heartbreaking.
it is heartbreaking. I have a hard time. Can I mention my book?
Absolutely.
Please.
I don't know where I show it, but
Yep, right here.
okay.
Perfect.
Okay. I've written a book called No Stranger to Iran, Its People, and Its Church. And what I've done in this book is using my life's timeline to make observations of what Christianity is happening in Iran. So I give observations from my childhood, going to an Iranian church as a boy and seeing the conflicts and how few Muslims were coming to Christ. And then being there after the revolution, I share about what it was like to sit with church leaders who when the missionaries were being put out, thought that would be the end of Christianity. Because for years and years and years, the finances, the support from American missionaries had kept the institutions going. And so there was this kind of this feeling like, okay, this is the end of Christianity. But it turned out to be the opposite. And the same happened with China. When all the missionaries were put out, Christianity, the missionaries did their job. They brought the gospel, then they need to get out and let the church go forward. And so the church in Iran, when I say church, I don't mean one particular denomination, just the movement of God in Iran has been incredible across all levels of society. Big movements among the university students, big movements. Even people in high religious positions and Islamic positions have come to Christ. The children of mullahs have come to Christ. And so it crosses all generations, all social statuses are coming to Christ. And that is just amazing. It will change the Middle East. It is changing the Middle East.
Yeah,
Well, you
God
have
is so kind in the heartbreak.
Yeah, you have to be so excited. Although, I mean, it's hard to be excited when there's so much bloodshed, but that you may have the opportunity to go back.
Well, some of my Iranian friends said, Iranian New Year's is March. And they said, we'll see it in March in Iran. Now, that's just a hopeful thing. What did the Jews used to say? We'll see in Jerusalem. I mean, it's kind of that way. I don't know. I know I won't go back to live there, but I'm sure that I would love to go back and preach and teach some seminars and just see the people. Because I've been on satellite television for so many years. I have a big, broad name recognition, more than I can even imagine. Just to give you an idea, during the 12-day war, I put a prayer on Instagram, and within 2 days, 100,000 people had viewed it. And since then, my Instagram account has gone to 336,000 people, all Iranians across the world. Now, many of them in Iran, now that the internet's not working too well. And 95% of all comments are positive. I get a few sort of negative things, take your American stuff out of here, you're colonists, all that kind of stuff. But most of them say, thank you for praying for us. We need your prayers, which tells me a lot of them are believers.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because their reactions, amen, or praying hands or whatever.
Yeah.
So God has given me how should I say it, an opportunity, an arena to share the gospel with that I would have never dreamed of in all my life.
Amen. And now is the time for everybody to be praying.
Yes,
for everyone over
absolutely.
there.
Yeah. And the Lord does amazing things when we get out of the way. So he uses us, but then his Holy Spirit's doing work regardless.
Amen.
So it's beautiful to see and continue to pray for. So thank you for all that you do. We do ask every guest 2 questions.
Okay.
And so the first is what is the best piece of life advice that you've ever been given?
Life advice? The best piece of life advice is to release those things that I cannot change to God. People, situations. As a pastor, you're always dealing with crisis. And at the beginning, I would be overwhelmed in my heart, thinking I had to fix everything and make everything right. So the best thing that set me free is let God deal with. I mean, obviously there are times when you have to speak to people about things, but let God deal with people. Let God deal with the circumstances. Trust that He's working things out for His purposes. That's the best advice I've ever gotten.
I love that. That's perfect. And then the second question is, what is a book or a movie or both that you would recommend everybody see or read before they die?
Bonhoeffer's autobiography. I think it had the most impact recently in my life. It's a little long to read, but his faith in standing up against the Nazi Germany was just incredible. It's well written, documented. That's a great book. I love biographies. I think I've learned more from biographies. And, I've read quite a few biographies of important Christian leaders, but that book really profoundly touched me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's been a blessing to have you, and thank you for being God's servant.
Well,
And
I give God all the glory and pray that I can continue to serve Him. I'm almost 80 years old, so I got to... Don't know, because Caleb had another mountain when he was 80. So
Yes.
I think you have a ways to go. He's got some work for you.
Maybe God still has some work for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
At least in March.
Exactly,
Yes.
yeah.
There you go.
The Lord's going to see that through for sure.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you
a
for
great
coming.
day.